every single person in this province in one way or another. In regards to the recent government initiatives, I think you could sum it up as too little, too late. The government, after many months of knowing that there was going to be a serious situation in this province in the coming winter with home heating oil, with gasoline, with other forms of energy that are getting up there in price, and the government comes up with what I would consider to be a less than adequate solution to the problem. Not only is the solution, Mr. Speaker, in my opinion and the opinion of our party, inadequate, it's also ill-timed, because by the time those who are eligible, the few Nova Scotians that are going to be eligible, get the request forms sent to them, and they return those forms and they're evaluated, and the check is finally cut for the magnificent sum of $250 on home heating oil and $100 for electricity. It'll be well into the winter before those checks get sent out, and the impact of the high costs will have already been felt. So in other words, the government is late off the mark with this particular ill-conceived program and ill-timed program. Program doesn't hit many Nova Scotians this winter, and those Nova Scotians are still going to feel the brunt of high energy costs, whether they heat with oil, whether they heat with electricity, whether they heat with wood or other forms of energy. Soaring energy costs is the biggest single issue facing Nova Scotians today. And this government's half-hearted announcement is typical, Mr. Speaker, of government announcements of late. Always projecting something out, always a half measure, never gripping with the problem and doing something about it immediately. This particular plan is a plan that they hope, Mr. Speaker, will get them by the next election, as are the other plans that have been promoted by this government in the past few months. Nothing substantive, just enough to whet the appetite, to get Nova Scotians thinking about down the road that we may actually get something from this crowd opposite, which is, again, anything that they do get from the government will be minimum at best. And I suggest that the increased costs that consumers in this province are going to incur this winter, the paltry sums that this government are going to send out to them, when, by the way, they eventually get around to sending out to them, which will be well after Christmas, into the new year, when people will have already been into the heating system and will have already paid a great deal more for home heating oil, as an example, than they normally would or what they did last year. So, Mr. Speaker, we're left with a half measure here. We're left with Nova Scotians, for example, a family of Nova Scotians who make more than $25,000 a year, that magnificent sum of $25,000 a year, are not going to be eligible. Not going to be eligible. And I say to you, Mr. Speaker, that people working in the system today in Nova Scotia, two people working in a family who make more than $25,000 a year, are still in need. I suggest to you that families in this province that make less than perhaps $40,000 a year with a family are in need of some assistance. But this plan doesn't address that. It doesn't say anything about anybody making more than $25,000 a year, except on the back end of the proposal when it comes to retrofit. But there, again, there's a cost to the consumer. There's a cost to the householder. And that cost is substantial in order for them to take advantage of the ill-conceived program this government has put together. So what does it do for Nova Scotians immediately? Does nothing. Gives them some hope that down the road they might get a check. Just like the $155 they got prior to the last election, on the eve of the election, actually. $155 went out to Nova Scotians. A cynic might say that was vote buying. But nevertheless, 155 checks arrived in the mail prior to the last election, and then a tax cut, which was since haul back also was announced by the government. And now the energy plan calls for the government to give $250 when they get around to it this winter. You know, and I suggest that perhaps some of the leadership contenders over there, two I mentioned earlier today, Lord Black and Peter Kelly, who would be two people who are interested in how much money the government plans to give away this winter, would probably be. Well, I don't think John Morgan would be very welcome from your party these days to run for it. But anyway, well, you know, Brooke Taylor has always been a person who was very interested in pursuing his career in politics, and perhaps if that's the way he feels he should go, maybe he should. But anyway, I would like to get his views on this ill-conceived program as well. But nevertheless, I think I wonder if the latest attempt at obtaining the favor of some Nova Scotians by a $250 check, or in the case of electricity, a $100 check, or of other sources of energy, are going to be pleased with that. They might be pleased for a week when they find they can get maybe a quarter of a tank of oil for that, and then it's game over. That's it. There's no long-term strategy here. There is a short-term check, a check. And this one is for $250 to some people. And I say to Nova Scotians that anybody who's making over $25,000 a year as a couple can forget about the check. They're not going to get it. Anybody, a single person making more than $15,000 a year is not going to get the check either. So they can forget about it. Any family that makes over $25,000 a year and is struggling to put children through school and struggling to maintain a house with a mortgage, they're not going to get anything because they make more than the magnificent sum of $25,000 a year. Who is going to get it? People who make $25,000 a year or less. A great number of those people in that income category, for the most part, some of them may be on community services or they may be in minimum wage jobs. I don't know how they can afford to own a house to put the oil in the tank in the first place. So I don't know which segment of our population this government is trying to target here, because the people that are out there that are making between, say, $25,000 a year as a couple and $50,000 a year are going to be hurting this winter. But there's no plan to do anything about that. And I question the fact that I believe the figure was used that there are 78,000 homes in Nova Scotia going to be impacted by this program, or going to be eligible for this program. The first part of the program, the $250, I would like to see how many of those actually are making less than $25,000 a year that can actually afford to own a home, if there are two people with children. You know, I don't know very many that can afford to pay a mortgage in the first place, and they certainly can't afford to be paying her $700 or $800 for every fill-up of oil in their tank this winter. So $250 is not going to go very far to somebody who's making $25,000 a year or less. And if you make $25,001, you're not eligible for anything. And there are a lot of people in Nova Scotia in that category as well. Anyway, I would say to you, Mr. Speaker, that we have a serious situation here that deserves much debate, Mr. Speaker. It deserves much debate. The plan that we witnessed here by the government is inadequate, totally inadequate. The addressing of the problems that people are facing with home heating oil this winter, with the price of gasoline, with the surplus the government had this year. I would have thought maybe the government would have, when they boasted about the surplus that the Minister of Finance brought in, would have said now's the time to give this surplus directly back to Nova Scotians as a tax break or as a direct, meaningful contribution to the serious problems people are going to face with home heating oil this year, with gasoline, with electricity, with wood, with all the things that people consider necessities this winter. This is nothing but, as I said earlier in question period, nothing but a bridge to get the government from this point to a point past the next election. This is what this government has done in all their planning. Never make a decision that will benefit the majority of people they're elected to serve. Just throw enough of the carrot out there that people will have perhaps a little hope they're eventually going to get something from this government. In the meantime, the government is hoping to buy some political popularity with it. Well, I can tell you, the last polls in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, show that this government is going one way, down, in the last poll. Despite what and I suggest now that the current leader is retiring, that those polls will continue to go down unless this government can continue to fool Nova Scotians into thinking they're actually doing something for them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will defer to the member from Clayton Park.
The honourable member for Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today in question period as well, we asked a number of questions concerning the institutions in this province that are also going to be under tremendous pressure through the winter as these costs are actually felt and their budgets go out of control. Today was tabled the document from Dalhousie University showing a $900,000 shortfall that they're anticipating, which, yes, was tabled by the Leader of the Opposition, who's here today. All of our public institutions, our school boards, our hospitals, our municipal buildings, all of these organizations are going to suffer tremendously. And I know that other members of the House will be speaking specifically about the individuals that are going to be hit. And I certainly am, in my own constituency, speaking to many individuals who have already called about the difficulty of locking in at more favorable prices, the huge increase they're taking from last year to this. But I wanted to go to the government's response today and talk some about their response to the municipal and school board and university sector, saying that, it's business as usual, we're monitoring the situation, we'll continue to meet monthly the way we always have with our school boards, and perhaps this issue will come up. So really, there's no sense of being proactive and about looking at what the prognosis is essentially for this coming winter, recognizing the world prices and the costs that are already being seen here in Nova Scotia, and taking some action that would help to remediate the impact. What we'll see in our school boards is going to be a cut in other educational programs in order to make up the difference. Clearly, we're not going to have our schools that will be cold or wings that are shut down. So therefore, we're going to have to take money from educational programs. And we see from the universities that they're looking at exactly that, cutting other programs that make sense. At Dalhousie, they talk about actually cutting their energy efficiency programs. So the fact that they're suffering these high costs for energy mean that they're going to now cut back on improvements to their buildings and other facilities that would actually save money in the long run, be good for the environment and good for their budgets. So what I really want to say today is, on behalf of those public institutions like universities and school boards, that the government's response is clearly inadequate. It's not good enough to say you're following the issue and you'll talk periodically to the people. You've got to be proactive, because all of us will suffer when these institutions are stressed and don't have the funds necessary to offer the services we depend on. So with that, I believe my time is up, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Now recognize the Honourable Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to be able to rise and speak to this matter of debate before the House, an issue that I agree is of paramount importance to all Nova Scotians, and an issue that we have to take seriously, and this government has. And part of what I think we don't want to get into is just a debate over whose plan that's been released in a bidding war is better than the others, because what was interesting for people suggesting that from the Liberal side that this is too little too late when we're ahead of the schedules for last year, this is a half measure. But you know what was interesting? All throughout question period, and even just this recent speech from the Liberals, they didn't talk about the Liberal plan. Because the Liberal plan fell short already. Because if you look at the Liberal plan, Mr. Speaker, they would talk about it being effective in 06, 07, $15 million for heating relief. We've put $25 million, Mr. Speaker, on the table for Nova Scotians. That $25 million, Mr. Speaker, is very much going to Nova Scotians. 73,000 Nova Scotian households that are eligible under our government's plan, and a plan that will see more Nova Scotians included, that will partner on the Government of Canada's and with and enhance the incentives from the Government of Canada. We have to deal with the realities of their decisions. We've had to analyze that as well. But when you look at how the Liberal plan would come into play, I don't hear the Liberal caucus talking about their plan anymore, because it has fallen short, Mr. Speaker, and it doesn't address the real pressing needs of Nova Scotians, and it doesn't do it in the manner that our plan does. And we've dealt with it in a responsible, as I say, reasoned and reasonable manner of what Nova Scotians can afford. Part of this whole debate comes around to how much more money should be spent. Well, what I do know, Mr. Speaker, and what Nova Scotians are very well aware, there's only one wallet that people draw from on a basis for tax revenue. One. And the Government of Canada has taken its response, and we've tried to be responsible in our response to that to try and work within that framework that they put forward. Because they're doing that plan and they're releasing that plan, Mr. Speaker, and we want to make sure that we get the most benefit for Nova Scotian taxpaying dollars to go into that plan. And so we've also recognized a more longer-term approach to this. And we've talked about the energy efficiency and conservation piece. We also recognize the best kilowatt hour is the one that you don't have to use to reduce costs, but it's a long-term approach. I do agree. I know that as we go forward, our budget considerations for the spring will include a very comprehensive and more far-reaching approach in the longer-term plan towards energy efficiency and conservation. That is something, Mr. Speaker, that we will continue to do in a very responsible manner with the tax dollars of Nova Scotians, and doing it within the fiscal framework of what this government can afford to do, balancing out the other priorities of Nova Scotians as well, and the needs that Nova Scotians have of government and their services to the people. It is all about balance, Mr. Speaker, and that's the approach we have taken to this, and that's the approach we'll continue to do, recognizing those in greatest need, Mr. Speaker, understanding that those people that are in greatest need assistance from their government at the provincial level to do what we can. And we've maximized that benefit. We've brought that forward to Nova Scotians, and we're going to see more Nova Scotians this year benefit. We've recognized increasing financial pressures. That's why we've increased by 25% the amount of money available, so up to $250 if you consider where it started, from $50 to $200 to $250. So those that would suggest government has not been aware of the pressures on Nova Scotian families, then they're not paying attention to the actions of government and the investments of government for Nova Scotian families. That is something we're not going to deter from, Mr. Speaker. It's something we're going to remain committed to, again, in a responsible manner with targeted measures that meet the needs of Nova Scotians and the families and the households across this province, but at the same time, Mr. Speaker, being responsible, putting in stringent measures for government, so that government's house in order is a leader by example. And that's what this government is doing. We're making sure that we have the best buildings, we're retrofitting smartly, we're ensuring energy efficiency savings are being achieved as we go forward to retrofit, as we train, Mr. Speaker, our government employees. For instance, over 200 of the Transportation Public Works employees have been recently trained on energy efficiency and conservation measures and how better to utilize government equipment and reduce costs at the same time providing greater efficiency of those machines. That's not a government sitting back and not taking action. It's about engaging everyone. It's about recognizing that throughout government, that simple tasks such as shutting down computers and making sure lights are out are all going to save dollars that we need as a government for priorities of Nova Scotians. I think that's responsible, and all government employees and the people that work for the civil service, I'm sure are going to meet that need so that the money we can save will go back to those in greatest need in this province, and also for targeted investment, Mr. Speaker, in the areas that will achieve better outcomes in conservation and energy efficiency. That's part of our plan. But you have to put our plan in context with the framework we had to deal with, and that was the federal government's response. And it's important to know that the direct payments to low-income families and seniors by the Government of Canada, and where we as a province fit into that. There's $250 from the federal government, Mr. Speaker, to families who receive the National Child Benefit Supplement, and they have also $250 for senior couples with the guaranteed income supplement and $125 for single seniors. And part of our plan in Nova Scotia is a response that actually will capture some people that the federal program and response doesn't. And also to build on the energy efficiency and conservation measures of the Government of Canada so that we are maximizing outcomes. We're making sure that we maximize the benefit that Nova Scotians can receive to incent and to make changes. And nobody has the one plan fits all, because nobody could get up credibly in this House and say that they can offer the total solution, because the total solution requires a commitment on everyone to conserve. It requires a commitment to build on energy efficiency. It requires a commitment to deal with the pressures of those in greatest need. But if anyone comes in here and suggests that they're just going to spend their way through this problem, that they can spend their way through global energy pricing pressures, then I think they're being irresponsible. And they're being irresponsible, Mr. Speaker, because, as I've stated during question period, if they're suggesting they can do all of that, then there is a hidden agenda. And that agenda is take the tax off here because we're just going to up taxes elsewhere. Because there is no way that any plan that's been brought forward, a hidden agenda by the opposition party, that the New Democratic Party, that would talk about balance. We all, I believe in this House, have made a commitment to making minority government work. In so doing, we also brought a budget before this House and looked at what the balance would be and the compromises necessary for program expenditures, but also in the revenue streams that government would have to fund $6.4 billion in a budget. So the choices we have to make as a government, and those that are saying, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, that members of this House are going to hear about the windfalls to government and all these money revenue windfalls. Well, I'm going to tell you, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the ensuing debates, and I suspect we'll have many over the course of this session, for people that would lay out something that is not there. This government is doing what we have with the resources that we have available to us for the best outcomes possible. So other folks that want to talk about we're just going to spend our way through it, they're going to spend in one hand to provide relief, and they're going to take in the other from other forms of taxation. As I've stated, Mr. Speaker, we've looked at many models. It was also in question period in this House when people talked about the equivalency of the HST on home heating fuels. As part of the number crunching and in the analysis, I talked about that. I talked about it for a reason, because we were looking at what the equivalence would be, rather than trying to suggest that we were going to, in short term, change the taxation system of this nation and agreements that we're tied with other governments in, that we actually would look at what the equivalencies are. And part of the equivalency and part of the considerations that government has a responsibility to do is to recognize those other pressures. So I've heard the members from the Liberal caucus, and I understand their concerns as others about people that are in publicly funded facilities and the need to keep them with the energy supply and sources they need. This government's very much aware of that. And because of those pressures, we are being responsible, and we have to be prudent with those tax dollars, because we will have to deal with some of those pressures, and we will continue to do that within the context of what Nova Scotians can afford to do. And one of the things we can't afford to do is not change the way we go about how we function as a government in terms of our physical operations and our energy consumption, how we do it as households, and we need tools and incentives to assist with that. So, Mr. Speaker, the government is doing a very responsible and responsive approach for Nova Scotians. And if you consider that with our $25 million with regards to expanded Keep the Heat, that we are providing additional sources, more people are included with that, more people will take advantage and have the ability to have our energy saving kits that have had a phenomenal response from Nova Scotians. And the reason we're including that in a comprehensive way to all our program aspects is because the feedback from Nova Scotians is it works. A $50 value that's providing over $100 in return on 1 year. That's smart investment. But it's also providing people with some of the tools that they can use to prove that there's a way to help reduce energy use and thus cost. And that's something that we will continue to assist Nova Scotians in doing. Making sure as well, for those with electric heat, old thermostat devices, Mr. Speaker, were inefficient. Could have a 4-degree variance. Well, 4-degree variance is costing people, so we're putting in place a program to get 3,000 older homes in those style thermostats replaced for a $200 value in doing that. And we're working on our furnace tune-up voucher, as we did last year, and expanding that further, and assisting to make sure that those efficiencies and upgrades can be done. That's all going to be done in a time frame that is going to be shorter than last year's delivery. So for the Liberals to suggest that this is too little too late, when in fact we had to do the responsible thing and see what the Government of Canada was going to do, so we could do what we've been able to achieve, and that's to get out there and provide a better program response for Nova Scotians with their tax dollars, making better use of their other tax dollars that the Government of Canada made decisions and choices on. So Nova Scotians have a better outcome because we have done the responsible planning process. And then we get into our energy efficiency and conservation measures. One of the questions that come up in question period, Mr. Speaker, was talking about transportation. Well, part of the program response we're doing this year is to help areas, especially some of the universities with ridership programs that have been successful, so that we do that, encouraging carpooling and other forms of reducing traffic and thus energy use and supply issues. We're also working in a much broader way. Aside from our incentive programs we're going to be looking at for public ridership and transportation, the Minister of Municipal Relations and Service Nova Scotia, we have an additional $27 million coming in for public transportation in this province. That's a significant investment. It is going to help increase ridership, provide better equipment on our roads, safer equipment, and also encourage more Nova Scotians to use public transit as a way of efficiently and cost-effectively getting to and from work and other personal priorities. That's what this government's doing. $27 million there as well. That's in addition to the $35 million. As well, Mr. Speaker, we've responded. Whether that's with the planning, they talked about education. The new Iona School in Cape Breton is going to be the most energy efficient one in Nova Scotia. It's about changing practice when we talk about the long term. And the long term has always been at the forefront of our planning process. We've been engaged in a very important process with the Government of Canada over Project Green and other initiatives. And next Thursday, we'll provide our environmental and energy action plan and the framework that will build us out many years. That will take us to a lower carbon future and provide Nova Scotians with the diversity, with the integrity in our energy supply network and our electricity generation capacity, to provide us with long-term investments for economic opportunities, but at the same time, more reliable, more consistent ability to plan and maintain rates so the fluctuations we're seeing on the international market do get mitigated. That's why, Mr. Speaker, also in question period, this government has been very dedicated to doing a very responsible thing in the energy market, and that's recognizing that our power generation for electricity in this province is predominantly from coal. And we have a coal source here domestically and not just the international marketplace. We're going to develop the Donka mine, but we're not going to develop it by dumping more public money. We're going to have private investment. Private investment is going to create more jobs, which will create more tax revenue so that we as a government can come forward, as we continue to do, within a balanced budget framework and provide the best form of governance and program priorities for Nova Scotians. And as others would talk about going to the test, well, this government is prepared to go to the test. We're going to stand up throughout this session of the House, and we're going to make sure we continue to deliver in a responsible manner with our targeted measures that will achieve the best outcomes, and that Nova Scotians can rest assured that their tax dollars are being invested wisely, prudently, and it's going to help those in greatest need and help others to become part of a longer-term approach and solution for the integrity and the well-being of Nova Scotians well into the future, a future that Nova Scotians can afford, can plan on, and more importantly, rely on this government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. We'll recognize the honourable member for Cole Harbour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly rise with pleasure to engage in this debate. And I want to begin by saying that I think for all of us in this debate, the fundamental thing that we have to keep in the forefront of our mind is that it doesn't matter whether it's the government caucus that comes up with the plan that fits the homes of Nova Scotia, the families of Nova Scotia. It doesn't matter if it's the opposition parties that come up with it. It doesn't matter if it's the Liberal Party. What matters is that what eventually is arrived at in this chamber is what is in the overall best interest of the people of this province. After all, that is certainly why we're here. And so when we lay out our respective plans, whether it's through the opposition caucus or the third party or through the government, we do that to try and make available to the government and to the people of Nova Scotia all of the options. And I would begin to speak this evening with an entreaty to the government caucus to not get caught up in the rhetoric of question period, or get caught up in the rhetoric of the heated debate in here, and instead try to focus. No, I'm serious. To try and focus on simply that. What is in the constructive best interest of the people of the province? That's why myself and my colleagues are here, and I have to believe, with many long-standing ministers in that government, that must be why they are here. And that's why, when we suggest these things to you, it is in the fervent hope that as Democrats, that as participants in the public process, you will try and take the best that is here to be offered, and to try and mold a plan that will truly serve all of the citizens of this province. And I remain committed to that. I'm hopeful that every member in this House is committed to that notion. Now I want to deal with a small piece of what the Minister of Energy had to say, and I think it's important that we do this because there's part of the government position around the energy program they brought forward is with respect to the notion of physical balance, of the ability of the government to be able to respond to the wishes, to the needs, to the concerns of the people of Nova Scotia. And that in particular has to do with the notion of taking the HST off of home heat sources. And this is something I know I heard the Minister of Finance say at one point in time that he was deep in negotiations with other provinces to see how this can be done. I remember when he said that. I remember that the Minister of Energy said at Oak Island that he had a recommendation on the table that was going to go to a cabinet around taking the HST off of home heat sources, and I think that they understood that is not something that simply materialized out of the opposition on a whim, Mr. Speaker, and that's because that belief that this is an unethical tax, that this is a tax on the necessity of life, doesn't just come from the members sitting on these benches. And I can tell you where it comes from, Mr. Speaker. It comes from the people in my riding. And this summer, as I went door to door, no matter what I was out to talk to people about, they would always say, keep up the fight to get the HST off of necessities like home heat. I heard it in Cole Harbour, but I also heard it in North Sydney. And I tabled just today some 7,500, almost 7,500 signatures on a petition that asked exactly that. And you know where else I heard it, Mr. Speaker? I heard it in Thorburn, on the doors in Thorburn. I heard it in Pictou Heights. I heard it in Clare. I heard it in Sherbrooke, in Guysborough County. Mr. Speaker, wherever I went, in Amherst, I heard them say, this was an unethical tax. This isn't even about energy. It's about the ethical nature of a tax on the necessity of life, on home heat, something you cannot do without in our climate. And it was, and I think to be fair, and I don't want to crank up the members of the third party, but this was a mistake that was made when the HST was first brought in. And nobody can tell me, and they can't tell the people of Nova Scotia, or you can try, but they're simply not going to believe you when you tell them that the tax law of this province is engraved in stone, that they have to be prepared to live with unfair taxes for the rest of their lives and for their children's lives. They don't believe you, they won't believe you, and they shouldn't believe you, because it's simply not true. It's simply not true. And now, I want to give you just an example. And the minister talked about the windfalls. She said, you got to talk about windfalls. But let me tell you this, Mr. Speaker. On July 27th, 1999, which is a date that I remember well, if not fondly, I remember it well, the price of a liter of gasoline in Nova Scotia on July 27th, 1999 was 59.9 cents. It's almost hard to believe that that was only 6-7 years ago. It's hard to believe. But you know something? When it was 59.9 cents a liter, what the government of Nova Scotia took in HST was 7.8 cents. And you know what they're taking in today, Mr. Speaker? They're taking in 15 cents. So there's one of two things happening. Either Nova Scotians are paying more and the government is getting more, or the HST deal was so bad that the federal government is reaping the benefits of the HST agreement. And if that is true, Mr. Speaker, that is only so much more reason why we ought to be getting out of a terrible tax deal that is not benefiting the people of Nova Scotia. So, Mr. Speaker, you should know that overall, the HST, the tax revenue, a consumption tax on the people of Nova Scotia, and let us remember that it is consumption taxes that disproportionately affect those people on modest and low incomes, those people on fixed incomes, the poorest people in our society who are disproportionately affected by consumption taxes. That HST has increased in value to this government by $370 million since this government came to power. $370 million. And what we have asked for, Mr. Speaker, what we have asked for is them to simply admit that this unethical tax ought to be allowed to be taken off and to allow consumers to benefit from that. There's no hidden agenda. It's very, very simple. This was an unethical tax. It was a mistake. It should never have happened in the first place. And consumers in this province should reap the benefits of the increases in taxation revenues that this province has seen. And in the last quarter, Mr. Speaker, the last consolidated statement of operations and accumulated deficits in this province saw a surplus to the government of Nova Scotia of in excess of $165 million. It's not that they can't afford it. And you remember, Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure I do, them standing up, and they had no problem when they brought forward a budget that was going to roll out a tax break for the large corporations. They had no problem with that, and they said it's a matter of good fiscal balance. That we can do it because we've been good stewards of the economy and we can afford to do it. And when they were going to roll back taxes by 10%, they said we can afford to do it because we've been good stewards of our economy and we can afford to do it. Well, surely to goodness, the people who pay taxes every day, who pay their income tax, who pay their property tax, and who, yes, pay their HST, deserve to get a break on the necessities of life. Surely, if you've been good stewards of the economy, surely you can afford to do that. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure I've gone on a lot longer about this than I wanted to, but I wanted to make the point to the ministers and to the other members in the House and whoever's watching out there that this is not a pipe dream. This is a very practical, to use the government's notion, it's a very balanced kind of approach. It is about being fair to people. It's about knowing that there are seniors who go out to fill up their oil tank and they get that slip at the end, and they see the HST on it, and they get angry. And they ought to. Because they ought not to be paying on a necessity like this. So, Mr. Speaker, our program is about that. It's about fairness. We've said to the minister, if you want to deal with retrofit programs, make them available to everybody so that people can truly invest in home energy efficiency. Make available interest-free loans so that people have the capital to be able to make those and to pay them back. And if he doesn't like no interest, make them low interest. Make them affordable for people. Find a way to let consumers in on the program. I mean, you look at the renewable resources around the province that people are using at solar, and they've proposed a 10% rebate on solar power, less than the HST, on those products. Do you really think it makes? Do you really think that that's going to make it more affordable to people? I wish it was true, but it's not there. It's just not there. When you look at wind power, for example, in this province, Mr. Speaker, the government needs to take a tougher position with Nova Scotia Power. The amount of renewable energy that's being used in this province as a percentage of consumption has not increased, it's declined over the last number of years. We need to see greater investments by the monopoly utility in renewable resources. And I was down in Argyll, and I went to the Pubnico wind farm.
Listen to it all, Ron.
The Pubnico wind farm, and they're supplying 1% of the energy needs of Nova Scotia presently. We have one of the best wind regimes anywhere. So we should be taking advantage of that. And the member from Windsor, and I realize that this is all good, the member for Hants West, sorry, I realize it's all good sport, but the reality is that the Nova Scotia Power as a utility is going to continue to use coal for many years to come. And it makes great sense to the people of Nova Scotia and a great sense to the utility, I think, to use Nova Scotia coal. And we ought to be for that portion of the load that it needs to operate its facilities. And the Donkin mine, whenever that announcement takes place, will be I think a very welcomed announcement on behalf of the people of Cape Breton. And I know there's I know I'm following rabbit tracks here, and I shouldn't, but the reality is, because they're rascals over there, as someone used to say, the reality is that there are a lot of sites in this province that were strip mined that have never been cleaned up, have never been reclaimed, and that's a tragedy. They are scars on the landscape, and the people of, for example, of Bollindry, they don't want to see that kind of activity where it's going to affect already the other industries that are there, the tourism industry, the agriculture industry. Mr. Speaker, they need to learn, the government needs to learn to listen to the people of these communities and take into account the way they feel about what the government is proposing. I mean, I remember seeing a recommendation that came forward to the government, and they said, well, this proponent of this strip mine hasn't actually done a very good job with respect to this proposal, so we have two choices. We can either send it back to them and say you have to put in a better proposal, or we can simply accept it, because since we only got one proposal, it's the best proposal we received. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that that's the kind of advice that's coming forward to the government? Anyway, Mr. Speaker, this is an important debate. I hope we've had an opportunity to add something to it. I do believe that there's an opportunity here that I really hope that the government takes the opportunity to seize it, because I think that we can become a national leader in renewable energy and energy conservation and efficiency, and there is a pathway there. And I'm not asking that you do everything today. I'm saying show the roadmap for people so we know how it is they're going to go about saving what they need to save in energy efficiency to be able to afford to live in this province. That's what I'm asking for. I'm asking for a reasoned approach, and I think that's what Nova Scotians are asking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand here this evening and speak on the energy crisis that we are already in. It's not imminent, it's not future, it's here and it's here now. Mr. Speaker, the proposed increase of NSPI will surely eat up the $100 rebate that's proposed in the present plan. $6,000 for retrofit. Not very many people are going to have that money. We need immediate results. And really, the planning for this winter should have started a long time ago. This is not something that's come overnight. I'll reference the cost of fuel at the pumps later in my talk. But, Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about is the soaring costs of energy as the biggest issue facing Nova Scotians today. And what I would like to do is quote from the Honourable Minister of Energy when he said that the province only has one wallet to pay from. Well, if that's the case, I'd like to know why this government procrastinated and lollygagged for 2 years to try to make a decision on the twinning of Highway 101 and wound up costing this province, this taxpayer, this one wallet, $20.1 million more than it would have 2 years ago. And suddenly it's the cost, and it's the problem, and it's the result that the bureaucrats couldn't make it. So what I usually do, Mr. Speaker, I look at the person in the mirror, and that's if I make a mistake, I blame the person in the mirror that's looking back at me. I don't point fingers at somebody else. But this government always seems to be, there's always somebody else's fault, and they seem to be trying to spend their way through to another election. The high cost of gasoline and heating fuel is being felt by Nova Scotians virtually in every element of life, from consumer goods and clothing, food, just everyday living has gone to everyday existence. I wonder, Mr. Speaker, I deal an awful lot with people who are in subsidized housing and people who are looking for assistance, but the priorities are roofs, a heating system, and water. What good is a rebate to somebody in a substandard house that the more heat you provide, the more of it goes out through the window or through a door that doesn't close properly and lets the weather in? I don't see the result of that, Mr. Speaker. I know I would be severely chastised for throwing money away in a public domain, yet that seems to be what's happening. The financial cutoff, Mr. Speaker, for this program is far too low. It eliminates an awful lot of people who need help, and a lot of those people that need help are always referred to the middle income bracket as the working poor. Mr. Speaker, there's going to be long-term ramifications from this energy crisis. We need a plan. It has to be a long-term plan. And as the Honourable Minister of Energy said, no one has the perfect answer. That's why I believe that government should put flexibility into their policy. One size fits all does not, will not, and has never, ever worked. We experience that on a daily basis between rural and urban areas. Policies are made for the large area and the heck with the rural area. But, Mr. Speaker, this is a one-year plan, and this one-year plan appears to me to be going from crisis to crisis. Wait until the lightning strikes, and then maybe we'll get out of the way, if we can. It's a stopgap measure, Mr. Speaker, that will bridge from election to election. The $155 checks seem to work almost, and now, Mr. Speaker, we're into subsidizing again. Not everyone, but that certain element that maybe we can win another election on. As I said, $250 won't mean much to a middle-income Nova Scotian or the working poor when they don't qualify to get it. It covers for 1 year. But what about the implications of the long term that's going to have on our economy? And there's a tough Christmas coming up for a lot of people. And there's going to be a tougher New Year, Mr. Speaker. We need more than energy, we need an economic plan. It has to be dovetailed together. It has to be a long-term plan, long-term economic development, because that's what energy is. And Mr. Speaker, any person involved in economic development 101, the very basics of economic development, the first thing you'll hear is you should know where you want to be in 5 years and definitely where you intend to be in 10. So if you can't raise your head and look down the road, then there's something wrong. You're going to have seniors, middle-income people, commonly referred to as the working poor, consumer goods, food, clothing, every aspect. And my learned colleague next to me here is going to develop on the business aspect of it, Mr. Speaker. The price of furnace oil. Did this just start? August 2003, 55.3 a liter. Let's just round it off. 55 cents a liter in 2003. A 27% increase. August 2004, we're up to 70 cents a liter. The storm is coming. Another 21.8% increase. Let's go to August 2005, 85 cents a liter. So it's not that somebody has not been pre-warned. It's not that this just all of a sudden overnight skyrocketed to over $1 a liter. It's been coming, and it's been coming slow and steady, and nobody has taken the time to recognize that. Mr. Speaker, let's give back to the consumer the excess money that's being collected at the pumps. If the government say they can't control gas and oil prices, then give the excess back to the customer. Why did they tack an extra 2 cents a liter on, and then just so they could make more money a few years back? The volatility that's in the fuel oil market and the gasoline and home heating fuel, we've seen it spike to $1.48 a liter. It's gone back down to $1.08. But Mr. Speaker, if you think back, when oil was $30 a barrel, there is a group that are very familiar with a colleague of mine who at that time said, you fellas better be prepared. Oil is going to go to $60 a barrel. There was those who laughed and scoffed at it and thought they were way out of line. Well, guess what? $60 is the standard price now, give or take a few dollars up or down, depending upon if it's Monday, Thursday, or Saturday. This informed group, Mr. Speaker, has now made the prediction that within a year, $60 a barrel will be a deal. They're saying within a year, you're going to be looking at $100 a barrel. I referred to somebody who was interviewed on CBC not all that long ago, and the statement they made was, you people in North America got it easy. You're complaining because you're paying $1 a liter. In Europe, we've been paying $2 a liter for a long time. And if the oil companies can get $2 a liter, they'll get it. Greed knows no boundaries. They'll gouge you to the nth degree. And whether you can make it to work or not, or whether you freeze to death is immaterial to them. The bottom line is, give us more, give us more, give us more. So, Mr. Speaker, we need a long-term plan, not crisis to crisis. You have to have leadership that will recognize the implications of a crisis that's impending now that we have to do something about. I think about independent truckers who signed contracts at a fixed price, and all of a sudden, their fuel costs have gone through the roof, their profits have gone to zero, and yet they're locked in. So, Mr. Speaker, the province can return the 2 cents a liter that they put on 3 years ago. And of course, we talk about removing the HST. It's a noble gesture, Mr. Speaker, but it's not doable in the short period. A lot of people don't know that, but a lot of people expect it to happen. There's also plans that are being put forward where there's nothing for electricity, wood, or coal. That's a narrow deal, and it just does nothing to affect the crisis in the economy. Mr. Speaker, governments are elected to provide leadership, to create legislation, and to bring forth programs that will drive change. We have industry, universities, community colleges, municipalities, and individuals. Give them some additional funds. Create scholarships so that they'll drive research and development. Reward them for being proactive. Tell them what we want. As a government, we have to encourage conservation, but we have to put investments into research and development, which is the future of the energy market. And Mr. Speaker, there's no reason in this world why Nova Scotia should not be anything but a leader. And the long-term goal, as I said, must focus on incentives in producing alternate energy sources and conservation technologies. Mr. Speaker, that's a must. We have to know where we're going and have an idea how we're going to get there. But keep the project flexible so that as things change, the program can be adapted to it. We have to encourage investment in innovative and sustainable energy sources, cogeneration facilities, solar and wind and tidal power. Mr. Speaker, I just love to talk about Wreck Cove. In my riding, Wreck Cove was a $170 million investment plus back in the 70s. They tied together the Shetty Camp River, Indian Brook, North River, and every little tributary thereof. They created dams in large areas to store water. Since that investment back then, by the way, which I must say is only assessed at $640,000, of which any one of us here would run out and buy it if they would sell it for $640,000 when it's probably now worth $640 million. But what I'm getting to, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that we talk about coal, which is a major energy source in Cape Breton and should be used, but we have to develop clean technology. But here we have Wreck Cove, which produces as much power as Pointe-Noquonee and Lingan. And guess what? It's all free. Mother Nature fills up these dams and fills up the rivers, and so there's no buying of any energy. So why don't we develop? We have lots of rivers in Nova Scotia. We have lots of wind around the coast. Solar heating. Prince Edward Island has had solar panels on the roofs of their houses since the 70s. Why don't we put in a program out there to create incentives for that, Mr. Speaker? We have to be proactive, develop what we have. We have wind, we have rivers, we have water supply. That's our fuel of the future. And Mr. Speaker, as I said, this present, what's before the legislature now and released yesterday by the present government is just a bid for another election. The answer is out there. We can resolve 75% of the problem by using what we have and allow research and development to bring us the answer to the rest. Mr. Speaker, I hope that what I am saying will not fall on deaf ears. Nova Scotia Power has to step up to the plate. And here we have Alberta, a leader in oil production, is also the leader in wind energy. And why can't we have that here? It's not something that's not available to us. So, Mr. Speaker, I emphasize Wreck Cove, the utilization of a free source. Once it's built, Mother Nature provides the rest. There's no reason in the world why Cape Breton and Nova Scotia cannot be a leader in what we have. Solar power, I haven't woken up a day yet that the sun hasn't risen, Mr. Speaker, and that's an energy source that could be tapped also. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll recognize the honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to rise tonight and to comment on a number of proposals that have been put forward. Look at the alternatives for this province so that we can move forward to provide measures that help our citizens during this period of prolonged elevated energy prices and to face the reality of higher energy costs in the future. A number of my learned colleagues from across the aisle have put forward their party's plans of how short-term, long-term they would like to see Nova Scotians supported and conservation developed, conservation enforced and enhanced. But Mr. Speaker, I think it's really key to look at the facts instead of, as one honourable member said, the rhetoric of question period. On this side of the House, we've been dealing with facts for 6 years now. The fact to make sure this province prospers, there's opportunity for our people and for our children and our grandchildren, involve fundamentals. They involve a balanced budget. We're into our fourth one. We were able to achieve that as a government in cooperation with Nova Scotia citizens and taxpayers. We also, during that period, looked at the long term. The energy strategy that this government formulated in the year 2001-2002 speaks to many of the issues that were ignored by members of the floor opposite. The NDP party fails to recognize or acknowledge that renewable energy in the form of wind is a key plank in that strategy. To achieve that and to get to the point where we are now, where projects are being announced throughout the province that will meet the target in the energy strategy of 10 megawatts of production by the year 2010 are already announced. Some of them are under construction. Other ones will begin next year. I'm sure the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, when he was in Amherst, would have been informed of 19 units that are going across the Tanamar marshes. That would not have happened without the hard work of Nova Scotians and the foresight of the energy strategy and the governing party. A number of things had to be in place, Mr. Speaker. We had to get agreements with Nova Scotia Power. We had to get agreements, and I can remember as minister working with my colleagues across the country and working with Minister Goodale at the time to get that 1 cent a kilowatt hour in for green or renewable energy. That turned the business case so that we could attract those companies from around the globe to put those facilities in place here in Nova Scotia. Those facilities are now being announced, now being built, Mr. Speaker. I hope certainly the Honourable Leader of the Opposition availed himself when he was in Amherst to see that natural gas is flowing in public buildings, in hospitals, in schools, as well as private enterprise. A cleaner form of energy, an opportunity for Nova Scotians to use their own resources right here in the province. Those are important first steps. They're important beginnings on a cleaner, more efficient energy source across the spectrum. They also are good for our economy, Mr. Speaker. The economy here in Nova Scotia, with the faith of the business community, has made great strides in the last 6 years. Last month's federal seasonally adjusted unemployment rate for Nova Scotia was 7.2. I believe it was in the vicinity of 11.2 when this administration stepped forward with Nova Scotians and accepted the challenge of let's make Nova Scotia the best place to raise a family and the best place to live. Those things are happening. The plan is working, and we're moving forward. My honourable colleague announced, the Minister of Energy announced an energy platform and strategy yesterday. That platform and strategy deals in two common sense key things for Nova Scotia. The first, it recognizes and works closely with the federal agreement on direct payments and support to low-income families and seniors across this province. Think back. it was this government that has stepped to the plate the last 3 out of 4 years when required to support families and people in need in Nova Scotia when energy prices rose too high. We're here again before the heating season begins with a workable policy. I had a look at the Liberal plan. They were going to let this winter go by, not spend any money to help out those families, and they're going to have a plan ready in 2006, 2007. We know that this winter is going to be a difficult winter for Nova Scotians, many Nova Scotians. That's why the plan's in place. That's why the dollars are there, and payments can flow at the beginning of heating season in the month of November. That's dealing with reality instead of political rhetoric. When I look at the plan tabled by members of the New Democratic Party, their cost $100 million, Mr. Speaker. That's their cost. Other people have said it would be double that with some expertise. Does that $100 million, and when you look at it in context of the revenues and the expenses, there's only one way you're going to pay for that. And members in this House certainly are taxpayers on both sides of the House and have dealt with enough budgets, supported or voted against them, that they know there's only two ways to pay for that in a balanced budget. And the official opposition has said they believe in balanced budgets. That $100 million, you either cut services, are they closing schools, are they closing hospitals, other government services to pay for that, or are they going to increase taxes? Are they going to double personal income taxes for Nova Scotia, double corporate taxes, drive unemployment from 7.2 to a number you pick it, somewhere in the teens? Those are the real options. Nova Scotians understand that, Mr. Speaker, and Nova Scotians want us to deal in a reasonable, measured manner with the resources we have, make sure we support those at risk and most vulnerable, and ensure that we continue on that road of growing our economy. And this economy is performing well over the last few years. We are going to pay for, we will pay for those programs like this, increased services for the people of Nova Scotia, and health care, education, roads, by a vibrant economy that continues to increase the tax base, not by raising taxes and using taxpayers' money to provide a program that is unsustainable. When the Leader of the Opposition talks about removal of HST, very impassioned speech, the only thing he forgot to mention was where he was going to get that income. Did he tell Nova Scotians he's going to double their personal income tax, or pick a number on corporate tax? Endanger business, endanger our economy? Didn't mention that. When he talked about 2 cents extra on the tax on the motor fuel tax, he didn't mention that for the first time in a decade, there's road improvements in this province. There's actual construction. There's actual maintenance, Mr. Speaker. We're actually seeing Nova Scotians, and I encounter them every day, say, for the first time in a decade, we're seeing improvements in our road. Those are vital commitments to the people of Nova Scotia. The member from Victoria wants that 2 cents removed. He likes, apparently, potholes in the road. That 2 cents is going purely on the road, as well as all motor fuel tax is going back into maintenance of road repair and construction. If you take that off, the progress slows down. Maybe that's what he wants in his area, but I can tell you, Nova Scotians I talk to want accelerated improvements in the road. They like what's happening, but they know it's the first step. They know we need more construction, more resources to put into the roads, because those roads are vital to our economy, whether it's tourism, whether it's protection for our citizens, transportation to and from work, whether it's the economic base across this province. They are the backbone of the economy in this province. And with the neglect they received for 10 years with the previous administration, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians fully see what condition they're in. And you know yourself, Mr. Speaker, you've collected Petitions, you spend the majority of your time collecting petitions. What are they about? They're about roads, and they're about those roads that are vital to the citizens of Nova Scotia. Reasonable Nova Scotians want those improvements. Mr. Speaker, the economy in Nova Scotia will continue to prosper as long as governments respect taxpayers' money. And when I say they respect taxpayers' money, that's doing our best to live within our means. Taxpayers aren't asking to have their taxes raised. The ones that make comments to me look to have them lowered. But they realize that there are vital services to be provided, and we have to protect those that are vulnerable. And I can't say enough in commending my colleague in his announcement yesterday on the short term to making sure it's there for Nova Scotians who are in need and vulnerable. He has dovetailed the program so it matches with the federal program of $250, which is basically equivalent to the 20% increase in petroleum or oil prices for home heating. The plan addresses the electrical increase that occurred last year. No Nova Scotian would look at you responsibly if you increased support payments for an increase that might happen or hasn't happened yet. That's not prudent. The plan is there in case and when it does. The other important key component in the announcement yesterday is about energy conservation and energy efficiency. It addresses across the board some of the highest use potential and saving potential from burners and furnaces to dealing with direct support, and I have to emphasize that, direct support in dollars in Nova Scotians' hands, low-income Nova Scotians' hands, to help improve the insulation value, improve the heating R value of their homes with various supports if they do the energy audit and are prepared to move forward, Mr. Speaker. Individual Nova Scotians will make that decision. They will look at where we can save dollars on their operating and heating costs, their light costs, and how long it would take to pay that back. And in a world of increasing energy prices that everyone in the House has certainly noted tonight, Mr. Speaker, it is a new reality that we have to deal with. It's a long-term plan that was announced yesterday that we can afford as Nova Scotians, that is reasonable and workable, that will move us toward that future. And when we look at renewable energy sources we have here in Nova Scotia, there is absolutely no question reserves in coal, reserves in natural gas are going to be important to our future. Developing them in a responsible business manner is also key and important to our future. There is not the dollars to subsidize those industries, those dollars, and Nova Scotians tell us that. They want better healthcare services, shorter waiting times, better access to medical procedures and specialists. They want better education for their children and their grandchildren, and we're doing that. The number of new school constructions, books and supplies in the classroom, the improvements in community colleges are moving our young people to a future where they can work in Nova Scotia and raise their families if they want to. It's a balanced, measured approach, Mr. Speaker, that is working with the resources of Nova Scotians, respecting their taxpayers' dollars, and protecting those most at risk. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Minister. We'll now recognize the member from Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And an interesting speech from the member before. I guess the only thing missing from his speech is at the end to say, that's why I'm running for the leader of my party. But, Mr. Speaker, certainly all the indications were there. So, Mr. Speaker, this is an interesting debate put forward tonight, and as the preamble and so on was put forward, there's many things that we can all agree on how energy impacts on our day-to-day lives. And what our plan as the New Democrats, or what the plan of government is, or the plan of the Liberal Party, what those various plans are, the long side of them and the short side of them, Mr. Speaker. And I would suspect that people could make a fairly large debate over each one. So those things being, in real terms, that none of us have the complete 100% answer, I think makes us altogether a fair debate. But I guess what I want to talk about in a large portion of my speech tonight is around retrofitting homes. Because it is like the government says they're taking this long view of energy conservation. They see the big picture, and the other two parties on this side of the House do not. Well, Mr. Speaker, they've really missed the boat on retrofitting of homes. Because I want to talk about in my constituency of Cape Breton Centre, in areas in New Waterford and Dominion and Reserve, where there's older company homes, some of them over 100 years old. Some of these homes, because of the wisdom of the great insurance companies that we're going to give tax rebates to, tax concessions to, will not insure because of their conditions. And some of those conditions are just that. Very, very real terms about how they can have firewalls put up and would help with insulation, how they can stop the bitter north wind from whipping through their homes. But yet this government has really done nothing substantive to help these people. Like the amount of money they're putting out really could not buy 2 triple-E glazed windows and have them installed by a qualified person. Yet they say we're doing this within our means. Well, what do you think those poor Nova Scotians that are living on fixed incomes are trying to do? Moreover than this government, they're trying to live within their means. This government parades itself as the only group that ever thought of living within their means. Well, you know what? And the member from Hants West says that's right. Well, I'm going to tell him that I have people living in my community making $9,000 a year, Mr. Minister, making $9,000 a year, trying to live within their means. These are hard-working people, people that worked hard all their lives, Minister, and they deserve a break. But yet, you can nonchalantly sit in your chair and say, so what? Well, Minister, you're not helping those people. In a substantive way, you're not. You are the people that are keeping them down. So, Mr. Speaker, that's a real concern for me, is what we're going to do to help these people in a substantive way. You know, it's much like seeing someone dying of thirst and giving them a thimbleful of water. That's what this is about. This isn't about real substantive help. I'm going to tell you things that this government does that are people that find themselves in that economic strata that the government will not really give any really kind of help or any serious counsel to. A seniors couple living in my constituency just recently applied for what's called to join the SLAP program, which is a Small Loan Assistance Program. They wanted to get some money to retrofit their homes, make it more airtight, make it more comfortable, make it so that they wouldn't waste energy this winter. What did the Department of Community Services, who run that program, what did that tell them? Did that tell them, like, boy, this is a great idea. You people are the type of people we want to get up and help. No. Lo and behold, that department told them, you're overhoused. You're a couple with 2 bedrooms. You're overhoused. This was seniors living in a home they brought their children up. And what does this government do? Does the government encourage them to stay in that house, to give them an appropriate amount of money? They weren't asking for free money. They were looking for an assisted loan program that could be amortized over a long period of time that they could pay back at a reasonable rate. But what did the government department do? Say no. You're a couple, you only need one bedroom, what are you doing? Like, never mind when in 2 months' time when families are forced to move away from here, come home and want to visit their mom and dad for Christmas and put them in the extra bedroom. Oh, no, we can't do that. No, you're overhoused. My goodness, you're overhoused. Now, as I said earlier, this is another instance of we are looking at an area, especially in areas that I live in, and indeed areas that the Minister of Energy lives in, and the member that brought forward the emergency debate, the older stock housing in these areas. This is some of the oldest areas of this province, with homes along like some of the streets, and my colleague from Cape Breton Nova along Victoria Road and all that. Some of those homes are in the 100-year age range. And these are good people. These are people that lived in these communities, built these communities, and want to stay there. And they haven't lived on government handouts. They've worked all their lives. And you know what? It's like what we're doing now is some of these people are living on pensions. And we're going to penalize them. We're not really going to get to a substantive level of saying, we're going to make this house for you and for if your next generation wants to come and live in this house, that it will be a sustainable piece of residential infrastructure that another family can live in, and it would be energy efficient. We're going to give them enough to get about a half a tank of oil and maybe a window in the back porch so the snow won't come in, Mr. Speaker. But overall, these homes, because of their age, will still be, by and large, not energy efficient. So what are we trying to do? What message are we telling them? Government is saying we're living within our means, but they don't care about the means of their own citizens. These citizens that contributed to the economy, more so I can say than the Conservatives themselves were the ones that drove this province into a considerable amount of debt. And now they're telling people who worked all their lives, who were taxed, saying, oh, no, all of a sudden the big spotlight of fiscal responsibility has shone down on us, and we know what to do. We know exactly what to do. We know how to extract you from those other parties that will take all your tax dollars. Well, Mr. Speaker, if we want to go into a debate of parties that govern this province and that were responsible for the public purse, then I think we will gladly bring that debate to the floor if the government wants to do so. And we'll talk about some of those people that are still sitting on those benches, the type of debt they hoisted upon these people that they're now asking to pay these exorbitant energy costs because all of a sudden they're fiscal gurus. They know how to run it. They're the ones with all the wisdom. They're the Yodas. They know all this stuff, Mr. Speaker. But you know what? Nova Scotians know better. Nova Scotians know, as friends of mine were telling me today, they were going in to buy stuff at retail stores and go do their banking, that by and large this plan is a joke, that it does not help in a substantive way anybody. It's the proverbial throw it against the wall and let's see what sticks. There's absolutely nothing in a large substantive way that you can say that tomorrow my life is going to be better, even a year from now my life is going to be better by the government's plan. So all we're asking government to do is to say, look, we do have an energy crisis in this province, and we have a deficit of energy efficient homes. You folks don't have all the answers. My party doesn't have all the answers, and the third party doesn't have all the answers. But I think if you're serious about trying to advance what Nova Scotians need and want, then you certainly can look at the other options. We're not asking you to break the bank here. We're asking you to see what's reasonable for Nova Scotians to expect. We're asking you to tell us that people in this province want and deserve to live in an energy-efficient home and to find our way there. That doesn't mean that they want to do it all with government money. No. But the problem is most of these people can't afford the front money. And this is the part that government doesn't seem to get. That people living in that, you know, we talked earlier about people making $40,000 a year. Well, you know, that isn't a princely sum of money for two workers trying to put 2 or 3 kids through school, you know, with a pair of running shoes costing about $120, $140. It don't take long to eat up that type of income. But we're saying this is, you know, let's look at what our consumers want and need, our taxpayers. Let's help these people. That's what we need, Mr. Minister, when we talk about energy problems in this province. You know, the purpose of this debate today, I would think, just by reading the resolution, was not to embarrass the government. I don't, you know, that's what I didn't take that from it. The member from Cape Breton South brought it forward, and it was agreed to that it was in order and it was appropriate for a late debate. It was not one to chide the government. It was not one to say that the other two parties their plans are useless and the Liberal Party was the only one that was good. I don't read that in here. I read that in here that this opens up a debate that we should have on the floor of this House of how do we resolve this problem facing all Nova Scotians. And my purpose for standing here tonight is to tell you stories about what happens in my community. And I'm quite sure that my community isn't much different than the other 51 members in this House. You know, we have lots of seniors. We have families on low and fixed incomes trying to send their kids to school, trying to pay exorbitant tuition costs at universities. We have all these things. That's what makes Nova Scotia great, is that these people can get together and do these things. They don't do these things because they have large chunks of money or trust funds or whatever, Mr. Speaker. What they have, Mr. Speaker, is a will to succeed in this province. You know, Mr. Speaker, you come from an area that's steeped in Scottish history with the arrival of the Hector, Mr. Speaker. These people didn't arrive at these shores looking for a handout, Mr. Speaker. They were earnest, hard-working people that said, we've got to do something, that we have a problem, that we come from a country that we need a fresh start. But yet, some few hundred years later, we're being pushed back again by a government who's telling us, you've got to live within your means. Well, you know what? For over 200 years, Nova Scotia families have been living within their means. It's governments that have been living outside their means. It's government who's been spending their money. It's not Nova Scotians who've been squandering money and not paying their light bill or not paying their oil bill. It was government that was doing it. And then they have the unmitigated gall to stand in front of Nova Scotians here today and say, we are the fiscal saviors of this province. Well, Mr. Speaker, that is so much phooey, because it's wrong. The people who are fiscally responsible in this province are the men, the women, the children who built this province, who shoulder that debt, who pay for that debt every day when they go to school, who pay that debt every month when they get small pension checks instead of ones that rightly should have given them for working in dangerous industries for 50, 60 years, Mr. Speaker. That's who makes this province great. It's not some Tory government that's into self-congratulations, Mr. Speaker. It's the hard-working men and women from Victoria County down to Yarmouth that do what's right in this province, and they should know that it's the people, not them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member. I'll now recognize the honourable member from Digby, Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honored to stand here in my place tonight and speak on this debate. As stated in our request for this debate, soaring energy costs is the biggest issue facing facing all Nova Scotians today. The impact of sky-high energy costs is being felt throughout the economy, and even as we speak. Just last month, Statistics Canada reported that 6,000 Nova Scotians lost their job, mostly in the retail and wholesale sector, and mostly because of higher fuel prices. I believe it's great that we're trying to help the people of Nova Scotia. God knows we need to help them. But what about the low-income small businesses and medium-sized businesses that are being affected in this province? The high cost of gasoline and heating fuel is being felt by all Nova Scotians. The higher prices for virtually all consumer goods, including food and clothing, are being affected. As transportation and manufacturing costs rise, so will the price to consumers, and in turn create inflation like our generation has not seen before. Nova Scotians are facing bleak prospects this winter and beyond as they choose between heating their homes, driving their cars, and putting food on their table. Small business is facing closure of their business, and at least they're having to lay people off because of it. As winter progresses, the impact of high energy costs will also mean a great expense to this government. The already razor-thin surplus will be in jeopardy due to the higher cost to run our schools, our universities, and our district health authorities. The cost of infrastructure projects will rise with higher transportation costs for materials like asphalt. Mr. Speaker, community services will be overwhelmed with new cases as those on margins are forced into public assistance. With the current community services, I fear for those who live on the margins. It's bad enough that there is little for current recipients as it is now. If we reduce taxes, how much worse will this department be better off? It seems we can't take care of our people now because of the lack of funds. Let's hope there is a community service system available for those who find themselves collecting social services from this province. Mr. Speaker, higher transportation costs for Nova Scotia lobsters this winter is going to have great impact on this economy. As we speak right now, the price of bait for that fishery, a $300 million fishery, has doubled. The fuel costs are doubling. The fuel costs will be doubling to get them to the market. The American economy is no better or worse off than ours is. Projecting out to next summer, Nova Scotians and North Americans will have very little money at their disposal for leisure travel. Our tourism this year was down 35% in our rural area of Digby and Annapolis. More impact on this because of the higher price of fuel. What is that going to do to the tourism industry of this province? We have more to look at here than the low-income people of this province. Like I said before, we need to take care of our low-income people. But if we see the reduction in financing coming into this province, we're going to have a lot more low-income people. And you can bet your bottom loony on that one. We believe that the government has not fully explored the long-term ramifications of this energy crisis. Government says it has long-term plans, but where is it? Where is the plan to deal with the full impact of an energy crisis? Between the high Canadian dollar and the high energy cost, people are going to lose their jobs, and we're going to hear more about it this winter. Businesses are closing now, small, independent businesses. They're laying people off. It's happening as we're speaking at this moment. $250 will mean very little, and it won't affect middle-income Nova Scotians or the working poor. and it's not helping small businesses whatsoever. This is nothing but a little more subsidy for big oil, and it's simply inadequate. Even if it were adequate, it only covers this year. What about the long-term implications for this economy, for the people, for the small businesses that drive this economy? When is government going to address the economic impacts? We need more than an energy plan. We need an economic development plan that will help the oil companies from driving us, this province that I speak of, into bankruptcy. Big oil companies are making billions of dollars, record profits. Why aren't they part of the solution if they're part of the problem? People need that answered. The only viable long-term solutions to reduce the dependency on oil and gas. Government, industry, and individuals must work collectively to implement alternatives and for renewable energy resources and reduce our dependency on oil and gas. Mr. Speaker, I'm asked by a lot of people. They ask me, why can we make insurance companies reduce their insurance premiums by 20%, yet not be able to do that to big oil companies? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member. I'll now recognize the member from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Mr. Speaker, if I could, I'd like to begin by welcoming you to the chair. I don't think you have presided over the House previous to tonight's emergency debate, and I would like to, on behalf of all MLAs, welcome the honourable member from Pictou West to the chair.
Thank you.
I've had the privilege and honour of serving in the chair for a number of years, and really enjoy the insight sitting in that seat gives one. And these deliberations tonight are very, very important, and I want to thank the honourable member for Cape Breton South, because I believe that he was very honest and sincere when he brought forward the energy issue. So I want to thank the member for Cumberland South for bringing this to the forefront. Energy prices and the crisis that we now face is essentially a global problem. In fact, economists are saying that the latest surge in energy prices could inflict harm on the whole global economy, possibly pushing inflation further. So it's something that all political parties in the province of Nova Scotia are wrestling with. And, you know, I just heard the member from Digby suggest that this isn't really a good program for the working poor, for low-income Nova Scotians. And while he may not have a full comprehension of the energy program, that the $35 million plan that we announced yesterday, I do hope and ask that he takes the time to clearly read the strategy and all the details regarding the program, because irrespective of what the leader of the official opposition said about rhetoric, there's a lot of rhetoric going around about this plan. And you know, I always take great pride in defending politicians, irrespective of their level, whether you're a federal politician, a provincial politician, or a municipal politician. You know, speaking of the federal government and the NDP, I think, probably realize the implication I'm making here. We don't have a Royal Canadian Mint to print money in this party. You know, there's no doubt about that. And if the NDP ever has the privilege of trying to, you know, and I'm just suggesting if they ever do, I know it's hypothetical at this point, they're going to find it very difficult to be all things to all people. You know, the MLA for Colchester Musquodoboit will be hammering away, irrespective of his or her political stripe, for more roads. They want their hospitals to stay open, they want their schools to stay open, and they want community services provided to those that really need that help. So don't forget that it's very easy to stand up and make promises, very, very easy. But look, we heard what the politicians have had to say. You know, the politicians are saying it's no good for low-income Nova Scotians, it's no good for the working poor, but that is political rhetoric. Let's, if we can, and I will table this document. This is the Halifax Daily News, and let's have a look at the Halifax Daily News, and I'll read verbatim. Thursday, October the 13th. Help on the way. Government heating oil rebate targets those most in need. Up to $250 back. Dartmouth resident Mary Crosby is happy to hear about a rebate. Filling her oil tank yesterday cost her $478. And I asked you, how many Mary Crosbys are your constituents? How many are your constituents out there? And here we are tonight saying that the program doesn't help low-end Nova Scotians. Now, here we go now. Rebate helps. This is on page 5 of today's Halifax Daily News. Rebate helps an awful lot, says resident on a budget. So what type of rhetoric is being spewed about here tonight? This is what the real people are saying that are impacted by the high cost of energy. In fact, if I could quote one individual here, Mary Crosby said, "It will sure help a heck of a lot. Oh my God, that will come in handy." That's what Mary Crosby said, but how about what Wade Bowser said? Wade Bowser, 28, said they spend about $115 per month on oil, so the $250 rebate is very welcome. And quote, "That will be going straight into my oil drum. That will be going straight into my oil drum." So look, you know, it's fine and dandy to play games and make accusations about honorable members standing in their place, defending what really is a well-thought-out, financially accountable energy program. It's fine and dandy, but you know what you're going to have to do, and the fact of the matter is, you're going to have to convince Nova Scotians. You can try. You're not going to convince us, the politicians. You're not going to convince the third party. You're not going to convince the government that you can only provide the help that you're talking about by raising taxes. That's the only way you can do it. That's the only way you can do it. So if there's an ulterior motive, well, you know, and that would be desperate. I'll tell you what. This MLA would tie himself to the hospital door, the Musquodoboit Memorial Hospital door, and to Colchester Regional Hospital if they dared try to close one of our hospitals, to deliver some other programs. You have to do things in balance. You have to do things in harmony. That's what you have to do. You have to do things in balance, and you have to do things in harmony. So please don't try to promise everything. You can't be all things to all people. You have to provide leadership, and that's what the Minister of Energy is doing for Nova Scotians. He's providing leadership, and this government's providing the leadership that's necessary, Mr. Speaker. So I realize that the hour is ticking along, but I did want to just stand in my place and commend the Minister of Energy for bringing forward a well-thought-out plan that will not break the financial back of the province of Nova Scotia and put us back into deficits that seem to be the direction. The only implication I can make is that either the NDP will take us into deficit financing again, or they're going to raise taxes. Which is it?
Recognize now member of Halifax Shabakto.
The days of gasoline at the pumps at anything under $1 are gone. I don't think that in our lifetimes we're likely to see gasoline at less than $1 a liter again. Now, I start with this point because, unlike some of the previous speakers, I want to make not a broad observation about all of the energy problems that beset Nova Scotians. I really only have one point that I would like to make to you this evening. It'll take me a few minutes to get there, but the point is one that I think we all have to bear in mind, and it has to do with the question of context, of history. How is it that we actually got to this point in the first place? Now, others have spoken about electricity, home heating fuel, gas at the pumps, those three main aspects of energy, and they've spoken about all the alternatives and how we can develop renewables. In fact, I was quite interested to hear the energy critic for the third party, the member for Cape Breton South, talking about how important it is that wind energy be developed. I found this amusing given that over the last number of years, on occasions when I've talked about the importance of wind energy and its potential in Nova Scotia, all I've heard from him is ridicule and abuse. If there's anything that stinks in politics, Mr. Speaker, it's the hypocrisy of a Liberal. That's not my one point, though. The one point I want to raise is to ask this question. Why is it that in Canada, which is a producing nation, that is a country that produces energy and a net producer of energy, why is it that we have to pay the exorbitant world price for energy? Why do we have to do that? Is it the case that in the OPEC nations, they pay $1.25 a liter for gasoline at the pumps? They certainly don't. In Venezuela, do they pay it? They don't. In Mexico, do they pay that? They certainly don't. In Nigeria, they don't. So far as I know, Canada is the only country which is a net producer of energy where we pay the world price, the so-called world price. The US pays it, Japan pays it, Europe pays it, but they're not net producers of energy. Japan is not a net producer of energy. It doesn't produce, I think, any gasoline. And you know what? The US produces, but it's not a net producer. It imports, I think, about 70% of its gasoline. So the question is, where we have a choice, why is it that in Canada we have to pay the so-called world price? That's a starting point. And this is the issue that I want to talk about just briefly. And like many questions like this that are complex, they have a history. They have a history mostly at the national level, and I want to remind members here of what that history is. Energy issues in Canada have always been central to national politics. I'm old enough to remember, although I was very young, the pipeline debate that brought down the Liberal government in 1957 and brought in Mr. Diefenbaker's government. Mr. Diefenbaker, that was an energy debate. Mr. Diefenbaker promptly appointed a royal commission, the Borden Commission, to study energy and report on it. And when it reported in 1959, he established the National Energy Board, and in 1961, he adopted a national energy policy. That was the first national energy policy that this country had, 1961. And you know what? There were two prices for energy in the country at that time. Quebec and the Atlantic provinces, under the Diefenbaker national government, paid what was the cheaper price at that time. That was the international price. And the western provinces, Ontario and the West, paid for Canadian-produced gasoline, and they paid a slightly higher price. This was not a good policy, but at the same time, note the fact that there were different prices in different parts of the country. What then followed in the 1970s was the OPEC oil upheaval. By that time, we were under a national Liberal government which brought in policies which had to do with establishing one Canadian domestic price lower than the international price. And that was true as of 1975. And in those times, they were much preoccupied with security of supply, in increasing the amount of energy that was produced in Canada, and they were much absorbed with the question of foreign ownership and trying to increase domestic Canadian ownership. But included with that was the fact that all of Canada was paying below world prices due to national policy being exactly that. And that was national policy until the election of Mr. Mulroney as Prime Minister in 1984. And you may recall that in 1985, Energy Minister Pat Carney promptly negotiated the Western Accord with the Western provinces, and that was it for the end of Canadians being protected so far as a domestic price that was lower than the world price. That was it. We had it for 10 years for sure, and depending on how you look at the years between 61 and 75, there was a two-price system in effect then. But for 10 years, national policy was we protect domestic consumers, and we do a variety of other things as well. And you know what? What happened next wasn't just the Western Accord and the abandonment of that previous policy. It was the institutionalization of the fact that we had to pay the so-called world price, and that was done through the Free Trade Agreement and through NAFTA. That institutionalized it by making us part of the so-called continental energy policy in which our energy was directed towards export to the United States. The USA first is really what NAFTA is all about when it comes to energy, and tied to that is the fact that we cannot differentially treat Canadian consumers from the way American receivers of our exports of energy are treated. That sets the context. Now, why do I point this out? Because I'm talking here in a provincial forum. Am I saying blame the feds? Well, yes, I am saying blame the feds. That's certainly a starting point. That's a very good starting point. And I don't forget for a moment the 1988 federal election in which the Liberals, then led by John Turner, were absolutely opposed to the free trade agreement. You remember that? I remember it. Now, that was something that seems to have been lost. That seems to have been lost on subsequent Liberal prime ministers, Mr. Chrétien and Mr. Martin. They haven't done anything about it. They have no intention of doing anything about it. They, despite the prime minister's speech in New York last week, in which there were some hints about energy, they're not about to give this up and give us the kinds of protections that we ought to have as a net-producing country when it comes to energy. So, my question is that although this is no surprise, because as I pointed out earlier, there's nothing that's nothing less surprising than the hypocrisy of Liberals in politics. My question is, why is it that we don't hear from that government across the way the same critique that I've just made of the federal government? Why is it that they don't start by saying, how come the federal government is not protecting Nova Scotian consumers and all consumers in Canada? Why aren't they standing up and saying that? Now, the answer is either they don't know this history or they don't remember it. But you know what? I don't know that that's really the case. And certainly now, if that was the reason, I've just reminded them. I think the answer is they don't care because they agree. They agree with this. They agree to the benefit of Alberta, to the oil companies, most of which are no longer Canadian-owned oil companies, that it's fine for Canadian consumers to pay this price. And what are they prepared to do to defend us? Very little. There are things that can be done to protect us, but it starts with the federal government. It starts with recognition that the federal government is the main culprit here, and we wouldn't have to be struggling with this if it weren't for that policy that was brought in by a conservative government nationally in 1985, starting in 1984-85 and continuing through the negotiations of the FTA and NAFTA. I've said it before and I'll say it again, Mr. Speaker. Gas could be selling at the pumps at 60 cents a litre, and all the participants, the producing countries, the refineries, the companies that are the retailers, and the governments could still get tax revenue, and all those producers and companies could still be making a profit, and we could be paying half of what it is that we have seen gas at in this province this summer. So, although I focused only on one point, I think it's an important point, and we should always remember the starting point and remember in our heart of hearts what it is that Mr. Mulroney and the Conservative government brought us in the 1980s, because we're reaping the harvest now. Thank you.
Time's allotted for the debate this evening. Thank the members for taking part in this very interesting debate, and we adjourn until 9 a.m.